When I was a little girl, I often thought that life would always be full of laughter, friends, and the scent of warm bread from our kitchen in Frankfurt. I used to watch my father's gentle smile when he read the newspaper, and my mother's careful hands as she arranged the flowers by the window. Everything seemed ordinary, peaceful and safe. I believed the world was kind. But then, slowly, the air began to change. I was too young to understand words like Nazi or occupation. All I knew was the people whispered more often, that the grown-ups stopped laughing so easily, and that our neighbors began to disappear. My father, Otto Frank, who always carried careful in his voice, decided we would leave Germany. He said it gently as if it were a new adventure. I was only 4, and the idea of moving to another country seemed almost exciting. I imagined new streets to run through, new children to play with, and maybe new books to read. Amsterdam welcomed us with its canals and bicycles and rain, at the smell of life. I learned Dutch quickly, I made friends, and for a while, I thought we were safe again. My father started a company, my sister Margot went to a different school, and I was the one who could never stop talking, who laughed too loud and dreamed too big. But then come 1940. The German army entered the Netherlands, and the rain began to fall differently. Suddenly, Jewish children couldn't go to the same school as others. Our bicycles were taken away, and our radios confiscated. I watched people cross the street just to avoid looking at us. I didn't understand what was so wrong with being who we were. When I turned 13, my father gave me a small checked diary, red and white, tied with a look. I didn't know then that it would become my best friend. I named her Kitty for that day, and from that day, I spoke to Kitty more honestly than to anyone else. She would never interrupt me, never tell me to be quiet, and never look away. My birthday was sweet than a June morning. My friends brought small gifts, and we played in the sunshine as if the world were only a rumor. But inside I felt a kind of a trembling, the sense that life was about to turn inside down. Then one evening the bell rang, and a letter came for Margot. It said she must report for labor duty. My mother went pale. My father took the paper in silence, and I knew from the way he held it that something terrible was hiding behind those words. That night, the adults whispered until late. The next morning, my father told us the truth. We would have to disappear. Not to travel, not to move, but hide. The world felt heavy, like a secret too large for my heart. We began packing quietly, folding clothes that still smelled of sunshine. My school books, my diary, and my cat, those were the things I didn't want to leave. Father said the cat must stay. I cried until my eyes burned. On July 6, 1942, we left our home. I wore layers of clothing, so no one would suspect we were crying too much. The streets of Amsterdam looked ordinary, trains raining, yet for me, every sound was a farewell. We walked to the building where Father's company had once stood. Behind its shelves and 3 rooms was a narrow staircase that led to a small secret space. The walls were closed, the windows covered with blackout curtains, and the air smelled of dust and fear. That would be our home, the secret annex. I looked around, bare walls, squeaky floor, old furniture, and I tried to smile. I told myself it would be an adventure, but inside, I knew that the freedom had just been locked behind us. At first, the silence was the hardest thing to bear. Outside, the bells of the Westerkerk rang cheerfully, as if nothing had changed, while inside, every whisper, every footstep felt like thunder. We were told never to flush the toilet or walk in shoes during the day, because the workers downstairs might hear us. Imagine living from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, as quietly as ghosts, afraid even to sneeze. There were 8 of us in that narrow hiding place, my parents, Margot and me. The van danced with their son Peter and later Mr. Dussel the dentist. Each person had their habits, their moods, their fears, and the air between us often thickened with tension. We were together, yet lonely in our own minds. At the beginning, I tried to treat it all as a game. I arranged my little corner, pinned photos of movie stars and the royal family on the wall, and wrote in my diary about every sound, every chorus, every smell from the kitchen, and Kitty became my refuge. Through here, I could laugh, cry, and scream without making a sound. Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan argued constantly about food, about cigarettes, about nothing. Peter, her son, was shy and awkward, always blushing, his eyes hiding behind his hair. I used to tease him, thinking he was dull and slow. Margot was calm, the good daughter who never raised her voice, while Alice always talked too much. My mother said I had to learn to hold my tongue, but my tongue had a life of its own. The days followed one another with unbearable sameness. Morning brought whispers and coffee substitutes. The afternoons were for reading, studying French, and writing long letters for Kitty. And at night we could finally talk, listen to the radio, or sneak a look through the curtains at the darkened city. The world inside had become something unreachable, a dream we could no longer touch. We depend entirely on our helpers, Miep, Mr. Kugler, Mr. Clayman, and Beep. They brought us food, news, and sometimes a small piece of cake that tastes like freedom. They risk everything for us, and I often wondered what made them so brave. There were moments of laughter too. Once, we staged a little play and I imitated Mr. Dussel so perfectly, then everyone burst out laughing, even my father. Those evenings, when we forgot our fear, were the only times we laughed human again, but fear always returned. Every knock on the wall, every unexpected noise below, could freeze our blood. Once, a thief broke into the warehouse at night, and the sound of police whistles outside kept us awake till dawn. We sat in the dark, holding our breath, waiting for boots on our stairs, and I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like to live on the edge of discovery. Food became scarcer, the bread was dry, the potatoes old, and still we were grateful. Hunger made us quarrel, who got the bigger piece, who had eaten more better. I was ridiculous and yet inevitable. People who live together in fear become raw, sensitive, and fragile. But even in the grey world, something inside we began to bloom. I started to see Peter differently. He wasn't just the shy boy who tripped over his words. He was kind, gentle, and lonely. We began to talk quietly in the attic, under the slanted roof, where we could see a patch of sky through a crack in the curtains. I remember the first time our hands touched accidentally while passing a book. His fingers were warm, trembling. My heart beat so loudly I thought everyone would hear. In that tiny room, love felt like rebellion. The purest form of freedom felt to us. We would sit together for hours, whispering about everything, the stars we could no longer see, the world we hoped to find again, the person each of us wanted to become. He told me I was brave. I told him he wasn't as awkward as he thought. Sometimes we said nothing, and silence itself felt tender. In those moments, I began to understand that even surrounded by fear, a human being can still hope, still dream. I started to grow, not just in years, but in understanding. My thoughts became heavier, deeper. I questioned everything. Why people hate, why they kill, and whether goodness still had a chance in such a world. I also began to feel distant from my mother. She meant well, but her words often wounded me. I longed for understanding, not pity. My father, though, was my anchor, calm, patient, endlessly kind. When I looked at him, I felt safe again. Nights were the hardest. Air raids shook the city, sirens wailed, and our walls trembled. I would hide my head under the blankets, praying that the booms would miss us. I wasn't only afraid of dying, I was afraid of never living enough. I often climbed to the attic window. I could see the shots, not a tree outside. It became my friend, tall, silent, faithful. In winter it looked like bones against the grey sky, but in spring it bloomed with white flowers, reminding me that life goes on, even when we cannot. In my diary, I wrote everything I couldn't say aloud. I wrote about my fear, my laughter, my guilt, my longing for beauty. I want to be more than girl in hiding. I want to be a writer, to live after the war, to show the world that despite everything, people are still good at heart. The seasons kept turning, though we could no longer feel them properly. The air in the annex was always the same, warm, stale, heavy with the smell of potatoes and damp clothes. I used to close my eyes and imagine fresh air, sunlight on my face, the sound of birds in the park. Sometimes, in the middle of studying or washing dishes, I would stop and let my thoughts wander outside to streets that still carried footsteps we could no longer join. We had been in hiding for almost 2 years. Each day felt like a repetition for the last. Yet I moved forward silently, as if dragging us behind it. The radio was our only connection to the world. Every night, when the house was finally quiet, we gathered close, holding our breath as the British news reader's voice came through the static. Those voices carried hope. They spoke of battles of resistance, of a day when the war might end. I remember the night we heard about the invasion in Normandy. It was June 1944. My heart pounded so hard that I thought it would burst. Liberation suddenly felt close enough to touch. We whispered and smiled through tears. Maybe, just maybe, we would live to see the world again. I went to bed that night imagining myself walking freely along the canals, holding Peter's hand under the summer sky. But the war dragged on, slower than hope could bear. Food grew scarcer, tempers shorter. Mr. Van Daan stole bread from the cupboard one night, and when my mother confronted him, he wept. Watching a grown man cry is one of the hardest things to witness. It breaks something inside you that never quite mends. There were more air raids, more bombings. The walls shook, dust fell from the ceiling, and we huddled together like frightened children. Yet I also felt something strange, a kind of inner calm. I had stopped expecting safety. Fear had become ordinary, part of breathing, part of existing. Peter and I became closer in those last months. We no longer needed words to comfort each other. One night, sitting in the attic, he said, "Do you think people will ever learn?" I thought for a while and then whispered, "Yes, if we keep believing they can." That belief became my light in the darkness. Even when the arguments grew worse, even when the silence felt unbearable, I refused to give up on people. I kept writing day after day to remind myself that goodness existed. If not in the world, then at least in me. But inside I was changing. I began to see how fragile everything was. Not just life but love, honesty, trust. I realized how easily fear turns people against one another. I saw it in our little annex, and I knew it was happening everywhere. Sometimes I felt older than my years, like I had lived several lifetimes in that small space. I often dreamed of what I'd do after the war, going back to school, becoming a writer, publishing a book based on my diary. I wanted to tell people what I was like to hide, to hope when there was no reason to hope. I wanted to show that even in the darkest times, a human heart can still shine. In July 1944, the tension became unbearable. There were rumors of betrayal. We didn't want to believe them. Still planned small birthday surprises. Still pretended tomorrow would come peacefully. But deep down, we knew something had changed. The air felt heavier, the silence sharper. Then came August 4. It was a warm morning, bright and ordinary. The bells outside rang as usual. I was writing at the desk when I heard footsteps. It's heavy, unfamiliar. Voices shouted below. Doors slammed. My pen froze mid-sentence. Someone screamed. The sound of boots echoed on the stairs. I looked at my father. His face had gone white. In that moment, everything we had built, our careful silence, our fragile safety, shattered like glass. The door burst open, and men in uniforms filled the room. I remember only fragments, the shouting, the papers scattered on the floor, the smell of fear. They took us all away. The diary lay open on the table, waiting for me to finish the sentence I never could. If I had known that would be my last day in the annex, I think I would have written something to say goodbye, not just to Kitty, but to the world. Maybe I would have written this. I still believe in the goodness of people. Maybe someday, when the world learns again how to love, someone will find these pages and hear the voice of a girl who kept dreaming. And maybe I will understand that I wasn't only writing about fear, I was writing about hope. And this is the end of the diary. For more than 2 years, the secret annex remained hidden behind the movable bookshelf in Otto Frank office building in Amsterdam. The people living there survived in silence, depending entirely on the courage of the helpers who brought them food, news, and supplies. But on the morning of August 4, 1944, everything changed. To this day, no one knows for certain who betrayed them. Some historians believe that an anonymous tip was given to the German authorities, while others think the hidden place may have been discovered accidentally during an investigation in the building. That morning, Nazi officers and Dutch police arrived unexpectedly at the office. They searched the building carefully until they found the concealed bookshelf that hid the entrance to the annex. The secret door was opened, and suddenly the hidden world where 8 people had lived in fear and hope for over 2 years was exposed. Annie, her family, the Van Daan family, and Mr. Dessel were all arrested. They were first taken to a prison in Amsterdam, then transferred to Westerbork transit camp, and later deported to Auschwitz concentration camp. From there, they were separated, each facing a different fate. Annie Frank and her sister Margot were eventually transferred to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany. The conditions there were horrific: overcrowding, disease, hunger, and the freezing temperatures spread suffering everywhere. Both sisters became ill with typhus and died in early 1945, only weeks before the camp was liberated. Annie was just 15 years old. Their mother, Edith Frank, remained in Auschwitz, weak from starvation, exhaustion, and heartbreak after being separated from her daughters. Otto Frank, Annie's father, survived Auschwitz and became the only survivor of the Frank family. After the war ended, he returned to Amsterdam, where he learned that his wife and daughters had died. Peter Van Daan, the shy teenage boy who had grown close to Annie during their time in hiding, was transferred from Auschwitz to other camps before arriving at Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. He died there in May 1945, only days before the camp was liberated. He was 18 years old. Mr. Van Daan died in Auschwitz after suffering from illness and the brutal camp conditions. Mrs. Van Daan survived longer than many others, but she later died during one of the forced transports between camps near the end of the war. Mr. Dussel, the dentist, who shared the annex with the families, was transferred to the Neingame concentration camp in Germany, where he died in December 1944 due to illness and exhaustion. After the arrest, Mipgis and Bevowski, two of the helpers who had protected the families during the years in hiding, returned to the empty annex. There, scattered across the floor, they found Annie's diary and papers. Mip carefully saved them, hoping one day to return them to Annie. When Otto Frank came back after the war, Mip gave him the diary. As he read Annie's words, he discovered not only the thoughts of his daughter, but also the voice of a young girl who had continued to believe in goodness and hope even during the darkest moments of history. In 1947, Otto Frank published Annie's diary under the title Head Actor House, The Secret Annex. Over time, it became one of the most important books ever written about the Holocaust, allowing Annie Frank's voice to live on long after her death.